to sort of come to a conclusion about that with you guys. So do you still have your King Lear's? If you don't, come grab a computer and you can get the PDF. I use the first PDF that comes up when you Google King Lear full text PDF so that we can look at this speech. And actually, everybody a computer, because I'm not going to project the image of the Pietà. I'm just going to have you look it up.
I spent so much time on it. I'm not gonna lie. I spent the entire quarantine on it. Not quarantine, fall break. All of it. Fall break. Yeah, and I cut all the little pieces out myself too.
It's really good.
It is really cute.
Okay, so pull up the King Lear PDF if you don't have it. If you have the physical copy of PDF, go to the last page. And then the other thing I want you to look up, just so that you have this to kind of glance at, is this statue, the Pietà by Michelangelo. It's a statue of, Pietas are always the same. They are Mother Mary holding a Jesus in her arms, a dead Jesus in her arms after he has been on the cross. So it's like, usually she's like cradling his head, or in this one, she's got him like on her lap like a baby. So look that up for me so that you can take a look at that. And let's first, while you guys are searching that and getting logged in and stuff, let's first read this speech. So Lear comes in holding Cordelia like this. Every production I have seen of this, he's holding her in his arms like, knees here, head here, like a baby, right? And he comes in and he kind of sinks to the ground and he gives this speech that says, "And my poor fool is hanged. No, no, no life. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all? Thou'lt come no more. Never, 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 never. Pray you undo this button. Thank you, sir. Do you see this? Look on her. Look, her lips. Look there. Look there." He dies. So this is his last words, right? And do you see how there are parentheses around the "do you see this? Look on her. Look, her lips. Look there. Look there." That's an addition. So remember at the beginning of this whole unit, I told you how there's a 1608 edition in the folios. Quartos is 1608. And then there is another edition of Lear that came out in 1623 in the folio. And they debate, was this a change that Shakespeare himself made? Or is this a change that some, theater producer made in order to kind of change the feelings to the play? So let's look there first. He gives this speech, basically, she's dead. Why did this happen to me? And then at the end, do you see this? Look on her, look, her lips, look there, look there. What does that little part in the parentheses add to the play? Brooklyn?
I think it almost adds a little bit of he's clinging to this hope. He's almost to me it seems like he is he says he's seeing her breathing or something.
Yeah.
He's kind of imagining that she's still alive, that there's still.
Yes, exactly. And I don't even know, it doesn't have to necessarily be an imagination, even though we don't return to it. It also might give the audience a tiny bit of hope too. So basically he looks at her lips and he might see that there's breath coming out, right? And then he dies with that tiny bit of hope. Now let's say he does not. He never, let's say that little addition was not Shakespeare's original intent, and it just says, pray undo this button. So he's talking about his top button, like he can't, breathe very well. So undo this button, thank you, sir, and then he dies. How does that change the meaning of the play, do you think? Alios?
But I think that little part has his final act of if he's going crazy, then that's will coming out. But without that, then
okay, good. So it's this one moment undoing the button gives him like a sense of control maybe at the end when everything else was out of his control. Kylie, yeah?
I was gonna say it's kind of like without the look on her, look at her lips, like that kind of thing. It's kind of more him, like, instead of dying with a glimmer of hope, it's kind of more him just kind of like dying in agony, like since he can't breathe and stuff.
Good. So it's that his breath is getting cut off, right? And
Yeah.
both of those sentiments then are about breath. One is undo this button because my breath is getting cut off, and one is I can see breath in my daughter. So if we don't get that extra little bit, we are suffocated at the end rather than taking a breath. Ella?
Do you think it's significant that like in the alternate ending, I guess the one that is as written, but maybe not original, that he dies and he almost returns to a sense of blindness?
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Like we spent the whole play like with all this imagery kind of related to blindness. And
Yes.
His whole spiel was that he couldn't see truly, he couldn't truly understand, and he wasn't entirely aware. And at this point, you kind of think he's finally like a changed man, but then he dies, and the very last thing he says was like, look here, look here. And so it's like it's like maybe he hasn't changed and he's still kind of living in this like weird reality. You know what I mean?
Yes. Okay. I love this reading, right? So like we were saying that seeing breath on her lips kind of gives us this sense of hope that maybe he dies with like a kind of happiness, right? But if we are being honest, like we know that Cordelia is dead. And so that sense of hope might be his kind of madness, right? This blind kind of obtuse, stubborn discounting of reality, being like, well, I'm king and I'm divine, so how dare my daughter die? So I'm going to die believing that she is not dead, right? Whereas the last line of without the parentheses says, pray you undo this button. Thank you, sir. And we've been talking about choking at like him not getting breath, right? But I think it's really significant that his last line then is reaching out for help from somebody else and depending on somebody else and then thanking them for that help, which he is not somebody who usually does that, right? It's usually just like, you owe this to me because I'm king. But here he says like, pray you, like I'm reaching out to a fellow human being to ease my suffering. I think that's really significant. Yeah, Ella.
I feel like in the other, like we're talking about kind of what he sees control in that moment. I think in the other ending, it's like the ultimate show. It's kind of like how he's waiting at the storm, and he sort of is like, he has a problem with like nature and with the universe being in more control than he is. He's like so arrogant and so stubborn.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like almost him dying like straight after like with this weird optimistic sentiment is almost him like the ultimate refusal of ceding control. He's like, I'm just gonna die. Like, you can't make me handle this. I feel like the first one is different because it's like he genuinely wants help.
Yes, I like that. I really like that. So let's look a little bit further too, and it says, my poor fool is hanged. Did we talk about in this class how the fool just kind of disappears? And so people interpret that different ways. Either the fool is hanged or he's calling Cordelia a fool. The fool is hanged, I think we could understand the meaning behind that. If he's calling Cordelia a fool, what does that suggest kind of like about the way that he has changed? Because we're kind of looking at whether or not Lear has had an arc. If we're going to accept that this play is nihilistic and it's all about how nothing matters, then I think we need to say that Lear does not change, that ultimately everyone dies and there is no meaning to life, right? But if we can find this arc that he undergoes, some sort of lesson that he learns, then even if we do all die in the end, and everything is material, at least we can grow as people, which gives it a kind of meaning. So if he's calling Cordelia a fool, what do you think that means? Brooklyn?
I think it's significant because it's he's kind of realizing that maybe if she wasn't like that, she shouldn't have been helping him. Like he doesn't deserve her help, and so he's kind of like saying like, oh, why? Like if she was smart, she would have just left me and just like forgot about me.
Okay,
but
good.
she like gave into like her sentiment, and she came back for him, and that's kind of like foolish, and he feels kind of responsible for that. So he's like, yeah, I'm calling her a fool. Like, why did you come back?
Absolutely. Okay, do you guys remember way back when we did the loyalty kind of discussion about Kent and Oswald? Yeah, and the fool. Why did the fool stay loyal to Kent? For those of you who are discussing, I think it was like over here. Rose and Angelina, were you guys discussing the Fool? I think it was a long time ago. Do you remember why the Fool says that he stays with Lear, or his little speech about it? I'm not going to go to that section just because I'm being lazy and don't want to find it. But basically, he says it is foolish to stay with somebody who cannot give you things, who gives you nothing. For example, right? Like, it's foolish for me to stay and follow him around. And he's giving the speech to Kent. Like, he's like, you idiot, why are you doing this, right? But then he says, but I'm a fool. So it's appropriate for me to do it. So I'm going to stick with him, right? So he basically has this thing that's like, he's my friend, and I'm going to support him. And I'm going to make sure that he's okay out here in the elements, even though I know that that's not going to be for my own benefit. I'm going to basically sacrifice my comfort to give somebody else just a little bit of comfort, right? And so in this situation, I think Fool then becomes a little bit interchangeable here, which is that, like, here's Lear recognizing that fools have power, like fools have a more human power than a king can have, because they're allowed to act on emotions and act on connections with people that exist outside of a hierarchical power structure, right? So you look here and he's like, why should a horse, a dog, a horse, a rat have life and thou no breath at all? So he's trying to contend with this fact that there's going to be a material world still without his daughter. How can this possibly be? He says, thou come no more. Never, 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 never. All right, now it's not the word nothing. It's different than the word nothing. How is never and nothing different? This gets like metaphysical, hard to talk about. Yeah.
I feel like nothing in a way is like, oh, I don't have nothing, but like you can get something. But when you say never, it's almost like it's never, it's like, that's it. There's nothing else. But like with nothing, you can have something in a way.
Okay, good. So no thing suggests that there is a thing then that you could reach out and grab, right? Whereas never is this entire, like this complete negation of possibility. There is no possibility. Yeah.
I feel like in a way, never it does almost indicate possibility.
Okay, tell me.
Well, I mean, like, I don't know. I guess I think I'm interpreting it completely in the opposite way, which maybe means wrong. But I just think like never implies that something could happen. It just, given the constraints of your reality, it can't happen. And so it's kind of time in this weird way. So it's like, something, it's kind of like I could never do that. But you technically you could. But like, something's constraining you. But with nothing just implies this like void of like action and this void of possibility where there is just nothing.
I like that. So, but I think what's really important here too is that nothing is about the object, a thing, and never then is about time and choice.
Yeah, never is more conceptual, I feel like.
Okay.
I think never is more conceptual than nothing.
Okay, I agree with that. So then never, 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 why repeat this 5 times? Why is this so important that he repeats this at the end? Like, this is the second to last thing, I guess, that Lear says in terms of lines.
I think it like reaffirms like his stubbornness and just like his inability to accept.
Okay, good. So in some ways we could read this as Lear has changed not at all then. He's just going to sit here and deny that Cordelia is dead, and he's going to say, never, 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 I will never think about this. And that could be one way of reading it. Someone want to read it more generously towards Lear? Or do we hate Lear?
I agree with you.
You think he's being stubborn, yeah. Look here though, it's like, thou come no more, never, 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 never. I think it relates back to what Brooklyn was saying about the Fool too. Like, I think he's recognizing there in a moment that he has cut off the possibilities of a future. And then he's cut off a possibility not just of a future for himself, but a future for Cordelia. Right? He's talking about the relationship that they have. She'll come no more, meaning like, it's not that she like won't be alive no more. It's like she and I will not hang out anymore. We're not going to be father and daughter anymore. Never, 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 never. To me, it sounds in that moment as though he's realizing his position a little bit in the tragedy, maybe. Yeah.
But sorry, I'm like, monopolizing conversation.
Oh, it's okay.
I think that like, don't you think that if he's placing more value on their relationship and his part in it rather than her life, like, doesn't that kind of imply that he hasn't changed? Because he's still placing himself before like the reality of her life. Yeah,
maybe this lament here at the end is mostly about maybe then his own sadness and not her.
I think he is regretting untapped potential. Like
I don't think that he doesn't regret. I just don't think that he regrets the reasons that like he felt he does.
Okay, I like that. Emily?
For me, this scene is kind of a parallel back to Act 1, Scene 4, where Lear's asking the knight where his fool is, and he's like, I need my fool, and then he's like, well, he hasn't been around because he vanished Cordelia, and he's been sad about it.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like, I mean, he's not, well, he could be referencing the fool here, but he's like talking like his fool is gone, and like, they won't come anymore. And so it's kind of like at the very beginning when like his fool's denying seeing him and Cordelia's gone and he's trying to make up with that with other things and he's still trying to have power but doesn't. And so it's like kind of like a loop for me where he's just like, I don't have the power to bring these things back.
Interesting. That's an awesome connection. I love that. Like, because he does say like where the fool has been like denied to him, right? In both instances. And I think that the fool, if it represents knowledge and truth and speaking truth to power, then the fact that like in the middle section, he kind of has to contend with that. The fact that the fools are now gone at the end means it's a reversion back to who he was. Oh, I think that's really interesting. Okay, look at that picture of the Pietà. This is where we'll end. So this is probably the most famous Pietà. That's how I'm probably say it wrong, honestly. That's how I've heard it say, but I bet there's like an Italian Pietà. I don't know. it's not racist anymore, but it's probably offensive. Okay, so
How do you spell that?
Pieta. Pietà, yeah.
Wiki.
Okay, so you have this really intricate statue. It's the most famous one because it's like the best one. This is in St. Paul's Cathedral in Italy, in Rome. And it's Mary cradling the baby Jesus, the adult Jesus, the Jesus after the cross, right? And this scene, we've seen it actually before. There's a very similar setup at the end of Crime and Punishment. When did we talk about it before? I'm not sure we did. I don't think we did. When Sophia is cradling Raskolnikov, there's a very similar scene there. Here we have the genders reversed, where Lear is the Mary cradling Cordelia as the Jesus. And many people have made this reference where they're like, this is a kind of Pietà scene. Okay, tell me this. How could seeing this as a Pietà create a kind of meaning to the play that's no longer just, we live, we don't learn anything, and then we die?
It kind of adds like a little bit more of a religious context to it.
Yeah, it does. So let's think about what that religious context could mean in terms of like finding actual meaning in the play. Yeah.
I feel like in a way that Mother Mary is a very good person at heart, and to like have King Lear be in that position of Mother Mary when Cordelia was already a really great person and she wasn't like her sisters, kind of shows that he himself was able to change and see that like, oh, what I was doing was not good and I was not a good person, and he's being put in that place, and it's like kind of showing that there was a change in that even if he dies, there was still purpose to it because he was able to go through a change that shows positives to himself.
Okay, especially if we see Cordelia then as a Christ-like figure who's sacrificing herself in order to give other people meaning. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that she like forgives him before she dies, like I forgive you for everything you said to me. It's kind of like she like atoned for his sins in a way. Because she dies and she's like the picture of innocence that shouldn't have happened, but like she dies really because of his first like sin of dividing up the kingdom.
Yeah.
And so it's like in a way it kind of brings it full circle, and she gets out of that loop of like sin.
Yeah, good. And yes, exactly. So, and it all depends on whether or not we see him accepting that sacrifice in the end, which you guys have suggested, like, no, not really. I will say, like, the connection between a father and daughter is really important to me there, too. The fact that he is noticing his love for Cordelia is not dependent on her speaking. and it's not dependent on property or how he like is going to live on after his death, because that's the whole point of him dividing up the property, right? Is to ensure that his influence is felt for many, many years. But here he's just sort of like, that doesn't really matter to him in this moment anymore. What matters to him is this connection with his daughter. Yeah, Brooklyn.
I really like you brought up like how she's not speaking and like how the beginning was so angry because she said nothing and now she's like literally saying nothing and he realizes like how much he loved her.
Yeah, exactly. Which has it's this ironic kind of effect, right? Where it's the opposite reaction that he had from the beginning. Good. Ellie Rose.
I think like the way like Cordelia is represented, it really like humanizes her sisters and like everyone else that was with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just like, oh, it was like family fight. It was like this affected like the entire like world
Yes.
in a way.
Yes, and that's such an important quality of tragedy. In tragedy, like Shakespearean tragedy, it can't just be that one person like makes a bad decision and it ruins him, right? It has to be one person makes a bad decision and it ruins the world. People in power have this like enormous effect. Part of that is because of what this play is talking about with fate and nature and the way that people are determined in certain ways by certain things. Like Lear cannot escape his madness. His brain is deteriorating, and that is not something that he can change. And this is something that I find like, it's not relatable because I haven't gone through it, but I find this to be the most empathetic part of the play, speaking of empathy and what that place is, right? Because you see people, I don't know if you've had elderly people, and I worked at an Alzheimer's ward for a long time, and you see people fighting that change, right? And rightly so. Do not go gentle into that good night, right? But at a certain point, you can't fight that change anymore. And things will inevitably happen to you. So that's where I think some people think that this play then gets really nihilistic, that really there's nothing that Lear can do to change the course of his actions. But the change then becomes really subtle. And I like at the end how we have to decide, has he really changed? Has he really seen the value in Cordelia, or is he still stuck on like, what does this mean for me? And I think it's totally up for debate still. I tend to lean on the side of he's made a change here at the end when it kind of accepts no, never, as being an inevitability, at least, that he can't fight anymore. But I see your guys' perspective too, that he has not, and that he's still thinking like, this is gonna hurt me when she's dead. And that is Lear. What do you guys think of that play? It's really sad. It's probably his saddest one, I think.
You know how to pick them.
Yeah, I do. I really like the sad, dark, violent one. Sorry, I just, as soon as someone gets their eye poked out, I'm like, that's the one I want my students to read.
I mentioned I was reading I Really Dying to my mom.
Uh-huh.
She was like, oh, is that for your English class? I was like, yeah. She was like, huh, your teacher has an interesting face, doesn't she? And I was like,
She's violent. Okay, I chose Pride and Prejudice this year, though. So that
I told her that.
Okay,
I
good.
love that one.
Yeah, a romantic one that I'm going to turn all into like about property rights. But
yeah.
there's still romance. You can still have romance even if you marry someone for their land. Okay, so let's get into As I Lay Dying then. This is another dark one. Sorry, Ellie Rose, I remember at the beginning of the year, you're just like, can we have one where we like people? This might not be that one. So we'll talk about what it all, like what actually happens. So actually, let me just get like a kind of a general feel for it. What are you guys thinking about? Actually, let me get my copy. I don't wanna, yeah. Okay. So what are you guys feeling about this book so far? The first
Pretty good.
Allie Rose?
I like absolutely hate old like Western feeling.
Oh.
Like, you know, it's
Like the Southern vernacular type stuff?
kind of. It's just like the way the characters speak and the way they don't like describe the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like especially the young characters, it was really annoying because like they'd be like, oh, this happened. Oh, this happened. They wouldn't be like,
Okay, good. So it feels like there's something in the narration that pushes us away rather than pulls us into connecting with people. Okay, Brooklyn?
I feel like a lot of it, especially like Ellie was saying, like younger characters, like it's not like it's kind of from the standpoint of like exactly their thoughts and not like not explaining things. Well, because
Yes.
it's kind of like this assumption, like that maybe the author already knows or something. Because
Yeah, good.
like I mean, obviously, like you don't know, but it's just like coming from their pure thoughts. They're not like trying to add more to explain it, like to narrate it more. It's just kind of,
Yes.
like in the moment.
Yes, this book is really exploring the difference between narration and consciousness. And this book sits more with consciousness, right? And it's just like, this is how thoughts go through people's heads rather than here's a story that I want to tell someone. It almost feels like each of these narrators is denying that there is an audience. And instead, this is just their brains on paper. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I think that like Huel and Cora in particular, their narrations, their like narrative style is almost stream of consciousness level.
Mm-hmm.
Like the tangents and the cyclical reasoning and the redundancy of the like points, like it's not like it's a bad thing. It's just that when it's so internal, it's hard to understand the actual plot of the book.
Yes.
And the only narrator who I actually felt like I understood kind of like the setting and everything was Darl.
Darl.
He made sense.
Yes, Darl is
He does not really have any internal dialogue.
right.
At all external.
Right, Darl is kind of the poet of our story, rather than just explaining what's going on in his head as it pops in his head like Cora does, where she's like keeps returning to her kind of obsessions. Like she's like, oh, and the cakes, she really should have bought those cakes, you know, and going over and over again. Darl seems to recognize that he is telling a story. He almost like stands outside of the story a little bit in order to tell us the story. So he seems to be the only one who like has any literary intent. If that makes sense, as though these are real people, which they are not. But any other thoughts so far on it? So it's really difficult to understand. Is it exciting? Oh, Kylie.
I do think it's a little difficult to understand, and with them kind of like not acknowledging the fact that there's an audience, I think it's kind of like it's kind of cool to see what's going on inside their heads. And like so far, just in the first like 10 sections, there's been a lot of like oh, if God wanted us to be, or if God wanted us to move around a lot, he would have made us flat on our bellies like a snake. I thought that was kind of cool. And also it kind of reminds me of a show I watched a little bit ago called The Devil All the Time. And I don't know if it's like just like the fact that there's so many characters, or if it's like set in the South and kind of hard to understand, but like that was a weird movie. So
This is the one with Pattinson.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah, the one where he's like a rapist or whatever.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I see some As I Lay Dying in that story for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
The way that it kind of cuts narration too and makes us mistrust people, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I like how you point out that little thing that Ants was talking about how like if God wanted us to walk, he would have, or moved, and we would have been snakes sliding around on our bellies, right? Because what I really like about this stream of consciousness type narration is that you get inside people's justifications. And we see the way that their justifications circle every time they know that they're doing something kind of wrong. Like the guy is not allergic to sweat, you know, like he just doesn't want to work. He's a lazy man. He has sons to do that for him, right? And so every time though you hear these justifications, it just gives you a little more insight into the character. Not in a way that the narrator is going to tell us the insight, but the way that we have to be psychologists when we read this book. And that's kind of why I like it. I think that's one of the reasons, is because I'm interested in psychology, and I'm interested in the way that consciousness can be represented on the page in a way that feels foreign to me. Like I don't have any connections to this setting. None of my family has ever been Southern. Do we have any Southern folks in here? You got some Southern connections?
Yeah.
Where?
Very rural.
Georgia and stuff. Okay. All right. So if I say anything offensive about the South, you let me know.
Oh, it's annoying.
Like, just remember, I'm Southern. But so it's completely foreign setting to me, right? And the people in it are pretty foreign to me too. I grew up in suburbia, so these are not like my people necessarily. And yet there are patterns of thought that I find quite relatable, where I sit here and I'm like, I do kind of do that thing like Cora does, where I'm trying to think about other things and I'm trying to stay focused on something that is really big happening here, like my neighbor is dying. And yet at the same time, I keep thinking about this little tiny slight that somebody did by not paying for my cakes. You know, so I think that that's one of the reasons that I really like it. The other reason is just the setting. So I think what we'll do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Faulkner and then a little bit about this genre that he's writing in. So William Faulkner's from Mississippi, a kind of notorious curmudgeon from Mississippi and a drunk. I swear all good writers are drunks. I don't know what that tells us, but a lot of them, especially from this time period. So he's writing kind of starting in like the 30s up through like the 70s was when Faulkner was pretty active. In 1949, he won the Pulitzer Prize for literature, the Nobel Prize, and then he has 2 Pulitzers. So he's been like very well regarded. Has anybody ever read any Faulkner? Like, has anyone read the story Rose for Emily? Or, what's another, yeah?
What did you win a Pulitzer for?
He won it for, I want to say it was this one, and then, let's see, William Faulkner. There's a Pulitzer Prize for literature. Yeah. I haven't read either of these. He won one for A Fable and The Reveres. And then he wrote I can't speak today. His Nobel Prize was for, a Nobel is just because he was a good writer. That's right. He just won a kind of a Lifetime Achievement Award. Yeah. So he was really well regarded at the time. He made lots of money. He wrote screenplays. So he worked in film for a while too. He wrote a lot of these like hard-boiled detective screenplays. So there's this writer that I love, his name's Raymond Chandler, that writes detective fiction in the 30s. And William Faulkner would adapt a lot of his stuff. So there was one called The Big Sleep, and then Faulkner would adapt Hemingway too. He did To Have and Have Not. So he's like working like in a lot of different genres at the time. As I Lay Dying was written in 1930, and he says he has a story about how he wrote it that I don't know if I fully believe, but basically he was working at a power plant, and he said that he would stay up, like he'd go work at the power plant and then he would stay up all night long, like midnight to 4 a.m. he said, and he wrote the novel at night. And he said he wrote it in the kind of stream of consciousness way that it appears on the page. So it's almost like he's denying that there's a craft to it. Like he's like, these characters just came to me and then I just put them on the page, you know? And he wrote them, and he was drunk all night writing this book in 6 weeks. And he says that he did not do a second draft. He says this is the first draft, and this is what he turned in, and this is what got published. So it's kind of, I don't know if I totally believe it, because it's this story of like pure genius, I think, that Faulkner would want us to believe about himself. You know, I don't have to edit myself because the muses speak to me, you know. But I do like the story because I think it like conveys the sort of quality of the book. It does feel like something that could have been written at 4 a.m. by a drunk man, you know. And it is part of a genre called Southern Gothic that a lot of writers at the time period were writing in. So it's got Gothic characteristics. The Gothic, let me point Kylie at this a little bit better. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. The Gothic characteristics are like disturbing and eccentric characters. There might be some kind of like mystical or occult qualities to it, you know. These might have like something about witchcraft in them. Sometimes the occult and mystical is kind of religious, but it's a Christian religion that like most people don't fully recognize, especially people from like the North wouldn't recognize. So that's kind of the mystical part. There is usually grotesque situations and bodies. There's lots of grotesqueness in this book, so you'll see that come up. And then there's stuff that's like not just Gothic, but like specifically Southern Gothic, which is poverty and violence and crime and the intersection between these. You know, to speak of intersectionality, like what about poverty creates violence, what about poverty creates crime, etc. So how these things all interact. There will be a kind of decaying setting, you know, where everything just seems like it's rotting a little bit. Everything seems moss covered or dirty. And then there will be a lot of times ambivalent gender roles, which makes these quite interesting. And ambivalence is kind of just the theme of it all, that we're not quite sure who's good and who's bad. In fact, everyone just seems like a little bit bad. Everyone seems just a little bit dirty and corrupt. And part of that is because of the setting that they're living in. So Southern Gothic literature obviously is very dependent on the setting because it has to be taking place in the South. There's some famous writers like Flannery O'Connor or Carson McCullers or even Cormac McCarthy. Has anybody read like The Road or seen that movie The Road? Like, or All the Pretty Horses. Cormac McCarthy writes about the South sometimes, but then he writes about Tennessee sometimes. So he's like Southern Gothic sometimes. To Kill a Mockingbird would be considered partially. Was that what you were going to say, Allie Rose? Sorry.
Yes, I didn't like To Kill a Mockingbird.
What?
So I don't know if I like the one.
You didn't like that one?
What about Atticus Finch? What about Atticus Finch?
You know?
I'm with you. Yeah.
Being so a little weird.
I just never meet people who don't like it. I'm with you. It's not that I think it's a bad book. I just think it's mistaught sometimes.
I mean, really, I don't know. I really dislike this like style. It just feels very. It always feels really empty and not like descriptive enough. I like something that's like vivid.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't capture my attention.
Okay. That's interesting because I would say Kill a Mockingbird feels so vivid to me.
It's so good.
Yeah, because it's like from the eyes of a child. But have you read the second one?
Yes.
I think that if you read the second one, you understand that Lee's intention wasn't white savior. It was more like because
Perspective.
It was perspective because she doesn't. I mean, in it, she openly like the Atticus was a member of the.
Yes.
So it's like it kind of dispels any of those feelings where you're like, oh, he's amazing. Like no.
Yeah, but so I have cousins who name their kid. I'm recording this. I hope my cousins don't look at my YouTube page. I have cousins that name their kid Atticus though, and when that second book came out, they were just devastated. I was like, just pretend it doesn't exist. Like you misread the book, but it's fine, you know. Yeah. It's Anyway, that's a Southern Gothic for sure because of Boo. Like Boo makes that like a Southern Gothic type novel, right? Because he's this kind of like ambivalent type character, morally ambivalent, but also like somehow grotesque type character. That's a really good example of it. Yeah, Ella.
Is that why they call? Because like Boo is like kind of like, oh, we don't know who he is, that kind of thing. In Monsters Inc., do they call Boo out the To Kill a Mockingbird because it's this weird thing that they don't understand that's coming?
I don't
and they
know.
like make up all these stories about it. Is Boo supposed to?
I feel like you should like make a TikTok about it. I don't know.
That's causing me issues.
All right, let's look then at the book to talk about the setting then, because setting is so important to Southern Gothic, right? And you guys have mentioned, I think correctly, that we don't get just a clear at the beginning, here is where things are taking place, you know? So what I want you to do, oh good, we have plenty of time. Okay, I want you to, with partners, how about you three, you two, you two, you two, and you two. Okay, I want you to find 3 instances from the first 10 sections when you get a very clear picture of what the setting is like. So you're looking for setting things. Setting is like atmosphere, it's landscape, it's what the house looks like, it's what objects look like in this room, anything that makes up the space. And I want you just to find, what did I say, 3?
Yeah.
3 instances of that from the first 10 sections with your partner. Okay, go ahead. And Kylie, you'll just have to do it on your own. Okay,
Okey-dokey.
put the 3 in the chat box.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like all of them. Sorry, they have
some sort of like description kind of through. I feel like the first one or the first section is really good on that.
So like you're talking about like the big boulder in your house. Bingo. Bingo.
They are very much, they're close to the way that it's updated. So this is very outdated. They're just like oh really? It kind of shows us.
In Daryl's last part, I guess in section 10,
And
there's a part where it's talking about the sun. That's another one, but we don't necessarily
I
have
feel
to do
like it
that.
sets up.
But it's like seeing the sun and now we're on the horizon.
It's my man.
Talk about what they, yeah, find the three and talk about what they reveal about the setting.
I think we have.
Yeah, I know, I just like, but I just feel like it just sounds like kind of miserable, like really hot, honestly, on that one. Just like, I don't know, the way that it says a blood egg, it kind of like, I don't know, I kind of just think of red, like if there's red involved in setting, but it just seems like hot and heavy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, my mom.
Yeah.
She's like there. And we like. Feels
Okay, with your burner, I want you to choose the one instance that you think is the most Southern Gothic feeling of the settings. Find mine too.
It's kind of funny that all three were from Daryl. I know, it's so true.
Yeah, it's page 39. And then that's it's very interactive bunch of your writing. It's very like run on.
Okay, so I'm just gonna check in with each pair. You guys tell me the instance, give me a second to find it, and then we'll talk about what it reveals. So let's start over here with Ella and Brooklyn.
You find I think it's around page 36.
Okay, so let's all go there around 36.
38.
38, okay.
When vitamin comes in the fish
Yes,
pot and there's just like blood everywhere and dirt around or
yes.
something. Just the setting of like kind of the rural lifestyle. Like just this kind of like you get like the aspects of like the raw wilderness, like
Yeah.
where they live in.
Yeah, I like that. So it's like it's not just that there's blood everywhere, but it's that like he's covered in blood, right? So he's like intermingling with the grotesqueness of the setting. So it says Vardaman comes around the house, bloody as a hog to his knees. Now that's such an interesting simile to me. What does that mean? Bloody as a hog? So to me it seems like the way that they interact with hogs is through slaughter, right? So it's not like our pet pig that hangs out in our house and then gets its own bed. It's like this is nature is for the purpose of use, and the use that you use like is through destruction. The way that you use nature is always through destroying nature, right? So it's bloody as a hog to his knees, and that air fish chopped up with the axe like as not, or maybe thrown away for him to lie about the dogs that ate it. So he's basically saying like, I think he probably like put the fish on the ground and chopped it up with an axe, because he's one, a little kid, two, dealing with a pretty tough situation and like doesn't seem to fully understand anything in this moment. People have talked about whether or not Vardaman might be mentally challenged. I guess that's not the way we say it anymore. Mentally disabled, I'll say. Is that the best way to say that? I mean, I want to say he's neurologically diverse. Let's say that, because I do think it's that way. Like, I don't think that he's necessarily like incapable of things. I think he just thinks about the world in a much different way than is kind of like a norm. So here he is, like he's either gonna throw it out to the dogs or something. Like Ant sees it as like Vardaman has butchered this fish and like whatever, I'm just gonna throw this aside. So him showing up completely bloody seems to be like kind of the norm and something to just sort of shrug off, you know? Kate, tell me about your instance of the setting.
So ours is on page 40.
Yeah.
And then it's the one that starts, the sun an hour above the horizon is poised like a bloody egg upon a crest of thunderheads.
Beautiful.
And then that's kind of where we stopped.
Okay.
And we were just talking about how like this setting seems like really hot and like heavy kind of.
Yeah.
And then just like really dark and kind of miserable to live in, honestly. 'Cause
Yeah.
It's just, the bloody egg kind of freaks me out, but it's like a weird way of describing it.
Yes, and yet that seems also beautiful to me. Am I the only one? The sun, an hour above the horizon, is poised like a bloody egg. Okay, that's a disgusting image, and I'm with you. But it's like upon a crest of thunderheads, which means that there's like this kind of purplish darkness too. That's a picture you'd take. I mean, that's a sunset you'd take a picture of, you know, and post it to Instagram. The light had turned copper. That sounds gorgeous. But then in the eye, portentous. In the nose, sulfurous, smelling of lightning. So it's like this mixture between the grotesque and the beauty that the grotesque can create. Because the bloody egg is a disgusting image. To me, that suggests that it's been fertilized and you've opened it anyway, you know? Like, you know what I mean by that with a bloody egg? So that's really, really gross. And yet it's the grotesqueness that creates the beauty, because a red sun is so much more beautiful than just like the bright sun that you can't look at. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was thinking about the fish thing. I couldn't remember the name of the serial killer. Then it came to mind Jeffrey Dahmer.
Uh-huh.
One of the first signs.
This class always gets into serial killers, I feel like.
It's
Okay.
like one of the first signs his friends started noticing that he was going a little crazy was he got a fish and he started cutting it open and like furiously, and they're like, hey, it's dead, it's dead. So could this him killing a fish, being him taking out violent tendencies, he doesn't know what was happening?
Yes,
by killing a
absolutely.
fish?
Absolutely, yeah. And you can see the way that like the setting then like creeps up onto him and he's covered in blood, that this way of him like accepting the violence of the setting into his heart, you know? Yeah. Sorry, eyelash in my mouth. Okay. Let's get the next setting. Back here to Angelina. What was your guys's?
Sure, okay.
Your
So,
guys's.
it was 19 and 20.
Okay.
And they're talking about the house and how it slants and how she says, as you enter the hall, they sound as though there's something out of there about your head. So it's kind of like this, like, talking about, like, ghosts, kind of like where the voices sound like, or like the people are even saying, like, where they have voices in their heads, and like that's how the house sounds. Like, that's, and like, it's also talking like how the house is slanted and how it's not very like structured well. So like you're like saying like they're not like very like structured, like have a big structure.
Okay, good. So again, like a way that the characters are mirroring the setting that they live in or soaking up the setting that they live in. I really like this idea of like the house being full of ghosts too, like whispers, because you get this kind of mystical occult aspect to it, even if, who is this speaking right now? Darl, yeah, that sounds like Darl. Even though it's not like Darl is saying that ghosts actually exist here, it's just that he's saying that the setting is heavy with meaning and past experiences, right? So I think that really solidifies or like speaks to this idea of it decaying, because it means that many memories have been made in that place. And the way that he's speaking about it here, it doesn't seem like good memories.
Yeah.
Allie Rose?
In another way, like characters in parallel to the setting prior to this, it talks about like before this it talks about Cora and her like baker, so like she probably has like stores close by to like their house, and then it talks about like the cigar shop, and so
When it describes Jewel as a cigar shop in the end, yeah.
Wait, was that like was that a real shop or like?
No, it was describing him as one of those wooden like chiefs that people would put in front of a cigar store.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, just going off Cora.
Yeah.
Just like I think like I imagine the setting as like an old Western town where it's like just two buildings, two rows of buildings.
Yeah,
and then
good.
Just the middle, and then I imagine like a hill, and so I imagine that like everyone knows everyone because it's such a small town, and it just feels very bleak because everyone knows what's going on.
Yeah, sometimes like a book like Anne of Green Gables, you read about that and the small town, everyone knows someone, feels very comforting, like a Hogsmeade, right? Like everybody kind of like knows, you know, the owner of every store, and the reason you shop there is because you want to like help that one person, you know, there's like this cozy feeling to it. But then there's this isolating, smothering feeling to it, and this seems to convey that smothering quality. And I think this section that you guys chose is good for that, because it's all these whispers that are like invading their mind, like they can't have something that is just theirs because everybody else is involved. I like that you point out that it feels like there is that it feels like there's like a hill, because the last thing you read for today is a very confusing line. I just want to point it out because I think it's interesting. So this is Darl, and he's on the road with Jewel. We'll talk about the plot here in a second, just so we're all clear. He uses portentous right there. That's right where we were looking. So it says, when Peabody comes, they will have to use the rope. He has puzzle-gutted himself eating cold greens. With the rope, they will haul him up the path, balloon-like up the sulfurous air. So basically, he's talking, Peabody is the doctor, you find out. And he's talking about the doctor being so fat that they're going to have to tie him up with ropes and pull him up the hill to their house. So you're right, there is a hill here because the doctor can't get up it himself. And it's like the puzzle-gutted himself eating cold greens is so, gross to me. Like, to me, that combined with the balloon like up the sulfurous air, it just sounds like he's full of gas, right? So like you get the smell of the sulfur, but then it just, I don't know. Peabody smells like farts to me is what I'm saying. And they're gonna like yank him up this incline. So yeah, we have this idea then that the farm is even more isolated than any kind of town because some people can't even access it. Okay, what was your setting line?
Ours is the very first page,
Awesome.
and
Yeah, easy.
it's that second paragraph that says the path runs straight as a plumb line, once smooth by feet and baked with forest by July, between the cornrows of late by cotton to the cotton house in the center of the field, where it turns and circles the cotton house at 4 soft right angles and goes across the field again, one so by feet and
Awesome.
and kind of what you're saying is that he's going into so much detail making this like cotton house sound so special because in a small town, those smaller things seem like a lot bigger deal because they don't have big things to look at, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The level, but you can also look at it, and I tend to go more cynical, but the level of detail he's putting into it is almost overwhelming and suffocating. So there's almost that idea that like his environment and its strange like focus broadness almost is so overwhelming that like every detail is failing him. But then also
Yes.
and there's also almost a level of denial because he says soft right angles, which don't exist.
Good.
He says turns and circles. He's just constantly sort of like contradicting himself in his descriptions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like he's got these weird like phase shifts in his reality and like his environment is just very sort of confusing and aggressive to him.
Yeah, it feels to me like he's rewriting with almost every word.
Yeah.
That each time he writes something, he's like, oh, I'm going to add another descriptor to this to make sure it's more precise. But what ends up happening is that he has both the descriptors in place then.
And there's
And
a level of him
we're
trying to
not sure.
romanticize it, too.
Yeah.
He's not successfully romanticizing it.
Yes. I think you're totally right here. I love that reading. I'm not going to add to that. I like it. Kylie, do you have a instance of setting that you could tell us about? Oh, you're muted.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Let me see if I can find it. I don't know. I don't remember where it was. Hold on. Oh, it's on page 19.
Okay.
So it says it's not really like an actual like thing that describes the setting, but it's if everybody wasn't burning in hell to get her here or to get her there. I feel like that kind of like helps it, at least it helps me picture the setting because it kind of feels like I feel like that's a common phrase where they are, and it feels very Southern to me that someone would actually say that. And so it kind of gives like a visualization of like what it looks like wherever they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think like the vernacular is a really good way of seeing the setting. The fact that they're talking in dialect through this whole thing, and that phrase in particular, if everybody wasn't burning hell to get her there, is not like something that we hear outside of the South. So it gives it that sense of setting. It also, to me, creates the claustrophobia a little bit more. So let's actually use this to transition into what is actually happening at this point in the book. We start this book with this idea of Cash, a brother, making something. It's going clunk, 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 right? That's the automata. Yeah. Chuck, chuck, chuck. Thank you. Yeah. Chuck, 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 right? What is Cash making? A coffin, yes. So their mother is lying inside the house, and just outside the window, her oldest son, Cash, is building her coffin, which is a grotesque idea in itself, right? And that's what Jewel is so upset about. Jewel is like, why are you guys in such a hurry to get mom dead and buried? Maybe we should just wait until mom is actually dead. Maybe she won't actually die. Jewel has a lot of denial issues here. He's like, maybe she won't actually die, and then we don't have to make this coffin. It will all be for nothing, right? But it seems like everybody else is sitting here planning for her death. So Cash is making the coffin. Darrell, he is first he walks, back to the house with Jewel, and he has that intense description that this group talked about over here. He talks about like how he will follow the right angles, right? But Jewel will just bust through the house and just keep going, or through the shed and just keep going. And he doesn't like pay attention to these paths. Darryl seems to be very, very interested in Jewel. Like everything Jewel does, Darryl describes in detail. And then we get back to the house, and there are two neighbors there. So Cora is a neighbor, and Tull is her husband. I don't know if we caught that. So they're just two neighbors who have come over to try and help out while they know that this woman is dying and the family is struggling. So they're there. Vardaman is the youngest boy, so it goes in this order. We've got the Bundrins are their names.
Got some serious names going on.
Yeah. You've got Addie and Ants. They're married. They have kids. Cash is the oldest. Then comes Jewel, right? I might have messed up this order. I'll check on that just to make sure. But I think it goes Jewel, and then Darryl, and then Dewey Dell is their daughter. And then their youngest is Vardaman. So it kind of goes like that. And people have sort of decided, and I'm not quite sure how I think at the very end, that's right. At the very end, you get a hint at what their ages are, but I feel like it's not a spoiler to just sort of reveal it, because it helps us get like this image as we're reading and kind of, connect more to these characters. Cash is probably early 30s or so, maybe late 20s. Jewel is like mid 20s. Darryl is like 22.
I did not think that.
Dewey Dell is like 15, 16. And then Vardaman's like 8 to 12, somewhere around
They
there.
were all 8 to 12.
No, they're older than you'd think.
I
Yeah.
thought they were older.
Oh, you thought they were older than this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, so it talks about the war, and that's how people have kind of decided these are the ages. They're not precise or anything. Like Cash might be 28, and but it's somewhere around here. So they're kind of older, right? But this is significant, that Dewey Dell is a minor. So that's something else that we need to make sure that we understood, because it's quite hard to understand. Let's go to that section, to Dewey Dell's section. I've never had somebody challenge this book. Like, I've had other books for this class get challenged. The main one that I've had get challenged is Streetcar Named Desire. But I haven't had this book get challenged, and I think the reason is because maybe we don't, or students don't, or parents don't fully understand what it's talking about. There are some scenes that I won't touch on in here that if you understand them, you see that it's pretty racy, I guess. And then this scene in particular is very important to the plot of the book. So that's my kind of warning about it being a little bit PG-13 rated, I guess. So here she says, this is on page 26. She says, the first time me and Leif picked on down the row, Pa doesn't sweat because he will catch his death from the sickness. So everybody that comes to help us. So basically she's saying, Dewey Dell is not very literate, basically. But she's saying, Leif, her friend, is here to help their pick the cotton or whatever they're picking, because her dad won't work, and so they need help on the farm. And Jewel don't care about anything, so Jewel won't actually help them either. And Cash likes sawing the long, hot, sad yellow days up into planks and nailing them to something. So Cash isn't helping in the fields, he's a carpenter, that's how he's making money. And Pa thinks because neighbors will always treat one another that way, because he has always been too busy letting neighbors do for him to find out. And I did not think that Darryl would, that sits at the supper table with his eyes gone further than the food, and the lamp full of the land dug out of his skull, and the holes filled with distance beyond the land. So basically she's like, I didn't think Darryl would be there because he seems so out of it. He seems so sort of interested in other things. She didn't think that he would be there picking in the fields. Then she says, we picked on down the road, the woods getting closer and closer in the secret shade, picking on into the secret shade with my sack and Leif's sack. Because I said, will I or won't I, when the sack was half full? Because I said, if the sack is full, when we get to the woods, it won't be me. I said, if it don't mean for me to do it, the sack will not be full, and I will turn up the next row. But if the sack is full, I cannot help it. It will be that I had to do it all the time, and I cannot help it. And we picked on towards secret shade, and our eyes would drown together, touching on his hands and my hands, and I didn't say anything. I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm picking into your sack. And so it was full when we came to the end of the row, and I could not help it. So what is happening in that scene, plot-wise? They're picking, let's say it's cotton. They're picking cotton on down the row, and she's saying, if my bag is full by the time I get to this row, the end of this row, then I will do it, and it will not be my fault. And so Leif says, okay, I'm going to start filling up your bag so that when I get to the end of the row, it's going to be full. So what are they doing in the secret shade in the woods? They're doing it. Yeah, so it's like she has this idea that she doesn't have to see herself as somebody who would go into the secret shade in the woods with Leif and have sex with him because it's out of her control. She like sets up this idea that if I fill up the bag, right, then it was fate. It was meant to be. It was supposed to happen.
And he's like, okay, I'll help.
Yeah, exactly. So he's the type that's like, well, I'm not just gonna let fate decide this. I'm gonna make this happen. Yeah, Alira.
It's like the one Christmas song about like the woman and man are trying to stay together, but they can't because like societal ones.
Oh yeah.
Not married yet.
Yeah, so they're getting drunk so that they can do it, right?
So they're saying, like they make up excuses so that they don't have to leave. And I think it's the same way. Like he doesn't want to be seen as like some like bad person, like as
Tramp. Yeah.
as like a slut basically.
Yep.
By society, and so he's trying to.
Yeah, she's playing these little mind games to make it so that it wasn't her choice at all.
Are you talking about Baby It's Cold Outside?
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
that was a song about him kidnapping Christmas.
No.
There's
It's just
debate.
like, it's just like, have a drink. It's okay. Just drink this, please.
Get roofied. Now. Okay, but here's the other part that gets confusing to people. So now we know what Dewey Dale is doing in the secret shade in the woods, right? And so it was because I could not help it. And so it was. That's all we get of that scene, but now we know what and so it was. It was then, and then I saw Darl, and he knew. He said he knew without the words, like he told me that Ma is going to die without words. And I knew he knew, because if he had said he knew with the words, I would not have believed that he had been there and saw us. But he said he did know. And I said, are you going to tell Pa, and are you going to kill him? So when it says kill him, who is Dewey Dale referring to there? Leif, yeah. It's like, are you going to tell Pa of what you saw in the woods? And if you do, are you going to try and go after Leif? Without the words, I said it, and he said, why without the words? And that's why I can talk to him with knowing and hating, because he knows. So basically, they don't have an exchange at all, actually. I misspoke. They just like look at each other. It's unclear. Did she see Darl see her? Or when she came out of the woods, did she see Darl and knew that he knew? I kind of think it's the latter, that it's like he has some sort of knowing look in his eyes and they're brother and sister, and so she just knows right away. And they kind of can have this silent communication with each other. And then it says, and that's why I can talk to him with knowing, with hating, because he knows. What is she saying there? What does that mean, like hating? Brooklyn?
It's kind of like now he has this like hanging over her, like this kind of leverage, and it kind of sounds like he isn't the type to really use it. Like he wasn't super aggressive about like, why did you do this or anything. He just kind of like, well, he knows now, but it's just kind of whatever. But
Yeah.
she always will have like this kind of fear, like that she can't. Like, I don't know, that she owes something to him because it's not.
Okay, so it could be like, yeah, I like the word leverage there. And I also like that the fact that he's not speaking out actually makes it worse for her. Like if they had had a fight, she'd know where he stands, but because he's just silent and only saying things with his eyes, it makes it more dangerous for her because she just has no idea what direction he's going to go. Is that kind of what you're, okay, yeah. The hating is interesting because like, Ali Rose brought up that Christmas song, right? Like, if someone knew what the girl did, then that means that she accepts, at least in one person's eyes, the label that she's trying to avoid, right? So if Dewey Dale is worried about other people seeing her as a slut, and Darl sees her, then she's like, at least in one person's eyes, I'm slut, right? So even if she doesn't fear that Darl's going to ruin her life, she still can hate Darl for what she thinks he's imagining. Like she's looking at him and she's like, oh, I know my brother thinks I'm a slut. Even if Darl doesn't at all, even if Darl doesn't care at all, this is important to Dewey Dell that he's sort of reflecting what she might think about herself, honestly. And then Darl at the end in section 10, so this is on page 39. We need to figure out where Darl is here at the end. He says, I said to Dewey Dell, you want her to die so you can get to town. Is that it? So he's like, you want mom to die so that you can go to town. She wouldn't say what we both knew. The reason you will not say it, when you say it, even to yourself, you will know it is true. Is that it? But you know it is true now. I can almost tell you the day when you knew it was true. Why won't you say it, even to yourself? She will not say it. She just keeps on saying, are you going to tell Pa? Are you going to kill him? You cannot believe it is true because you cannot believe that Dewey Dell Bundren, could have such bad luck. Is that it? So what is revealed in that little section? Very, very deep in the text, like not overtly at all, but there's something important that's revealed about Dewey Dell there. Allie Rose?
I think she hopes that her mom can die so that she can have like this freedom to do whatever she wants. And at the same time, she's also worrying about if Darl knows and if Darl's gonna do anything about it. And so she's like freaking out because is it gonna be like an awful day?
Yeah.
Is her mom not gonna die and is Darl gonna tell her dad?
Okay, good. So it's the uncertainty that she is freaking out about, right? I do think that she is looking for a kind of freedom, but it's a specific kind of freedom that she needs to be free to do a certain thing in town. Yeah, Brooklyn.
I think she also wants to, like you were talking about earlier, be free of those like stereotypes. And I think Daryl is the one who's kind of like, she feels like pushing those on her because if she's not telling these things to herself, like she's not obviously thinking like, I want my mom to die. She's not like, she's probably not thinking those exact words to herself. But when Daryl says it, like it makes it more real. And I think like her bad luck is her realizing that maybe like her intentions aren't great.
Okay, so it's like a bad luck that she's forced to confront herself. Okay, yeah.
I don't see it like that at all because that happened earlier. I don't know how like far after this is, but like to say, oh, how could I have such bad luck? It's like she does it once and something comes out of it, aka pregnancy, because it wasn't like they could do anything to stop the pregnancy.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's like she wants her mom to die because I think she's pregnant right now, and she's like, so then I don't have to tell my mom I'm pregnant at 15 years old.
Yeah, that's it. Dewey Dell's pregnant. Yeah. So when it says you want to get to town, what would she be doing in town if she's pregnant? What?
Birth.
Either birth or the other thing that you can
abortion.
do when you're pregnant at 15, right? Yeah, she's looking for an abortion to go into town. She needs her mom to die so that she can go to town, get an abortion, come back, and no one will know about it.
When is this set?
1930.
Oh, okay. I thought it was much earlier.
Yeah, it's set in like, it's set in like 1930. I assume it's the same year that it was written around then. So it's like a devastated South economically, but there are still that is still available. Okay, I'm not just pulling that out from that paragraph. When I first read that paragraph, just full disclosure, and I first read this when I was like after grad school, so it's not that, anyway. So when I first read that, I did not understand what was happening there. What happens with this book is that the narrations stack up on top of each other so that it'll say something like this and you'll be like, I have no idea what that means. I'm just gonna keep going, right? And then when we get to the next Dewey Dell section, she starts talking about her pregnancy in ways that feel a little bit more clear. And as we go through then to the next Darl section, he starts to reveal things and you don't become fully sure of what the plot is until like, 5 chapters in. And then you're like, oh, that's what he meant back in chapter 3 when he said this thing. And so that makes it a very difficult book to read. I assume that you have already encountered that, right? It becomes hard to understand, like, what is this horse that Jewel has a relationship with? And then you don't understand, like, what his whole deal with the horses until like the very end of the book. It's circular that way. It's different characters thinking about events in different ways. And some characters are easier to understand like Darl, and then some characters are impossible to understand like Vardaman and Dewey Dell. So the key here is like perseverance. If you feel like totally lost, it's also careful reading, but if you feel totally lost, go ahead and look at some summaries on like a SparkNotes, but just know that the experience of reading the book is supposed to be uncertainty as you go, and sort of unraveling the mystery as you go. But I will say, when I read it the first time, there were a couple things that I had to look at SparkNotes because I was like, I'm so lost at this point. It's not fun to read anymore. So just be careful of the spoilers if you're doing that. Yeah.
Which narrator's account do you personally trust the most? Just for me, strangely, it's Dewey Dell.
Dewey Dells. Why?
I think that her limited grasp on English actually makes her more honest and authentic. Because even though her account is very internal and kind of redundant sometimes, I feel like she actually is fully honest about the corruption and about the sort of darkness within the environment. I feel like those who have more sophisticated prose, like Darl, for example, or even Cora, I don't trust them as much because they attempt to romanticize through language.
I think then when you read Vardaman's section, think about that idea and think if that still stands. Because Vardaman, even more than Dewey Dell, doesn't have a grasp of language, and yet he seems to have a very interesting perspective on the world. Yeah, I think that Tull gives us the clearest events of the story often. Darl as the poet, I don't trust a narrator that wants to narrate that much. And I get your point about Dewey Dell, but I would say Vardaman for me. That's who I trust the most as far as what's really happening. But in this book, we're also going to talk about how nothing's really happening. These are just little sketchings on the page, right? Okay, I love this book. Are you liking it more after today? Okay, good. As we talk about this one, I think it does get better. You're on your own at home as you're reading and you struggle through it and you throw it across the room and you're like, I hate this. And then we come to class and people are like, oh, that's deep. I like that. So I'm hoping that's the way it works for you guys too. I read it with a friend, so we would come together and talk about it after each 10 sections. And that was the perfect way to do it. So I'm hoping that translates. Okay, Kylie, class is done. And they're doing an assembly thing for Hearts of Gold now. So
Okay, awesome.
Later.
Bye.
Bye.